G'day YouTubers, this is part 4 of the series on Central Moreton Bay. We finished the last episode at Dunwich, so in this episode I'm going to continue up the Rainbow Channel to Amity. Probably about a year or so ago I had some live footage from this area, but it's long since been deleted from my hard drive due to lack of space. I did scan some really old photos and put them in towards the end of the video, so let's get straight into it. As I started doing in the previous video, I'm providing some travel times and fuel usage just as a general guide from various ramps to Myora. A little bit further in on the video you'll find the same thing presented for the various ramps to Amity. Now just bear in mind, it is your responsibility to make sure you've got enough fuel. Don't take this as gospel, your boat may use more or less fuel than mine does. Continuing north in the Rainbow Channel from Dunwich, the next point of interest is the 1 mile. I asked one of the old salts many years ago if he knew why it was called the 1 mile, and he looked at me like I was a bit simple and said, well, it's a mile from Dunwich. I thought about that for a few days and got a map out and measured it, and to this day I haven't found a map where it's a mile from Dunwich. I reckon it's more like half that distance. So I guess he was either pulling my leg, or it's a bit like you ask someone out in the bush how far something is and he says 10 minutes down the road and 30 minutes driving further on you still haven't found it. And before we leave this slide, just note the lead lights on the shore. They're there to guide you in through the narrow channel. The channel is narrow, but it is plenty deep enough. Just line those lead lights up and you can follow it straight in. And in this view from Google Earth, you can see that about 2/3 of the way into the channel you turn off to the left into the anchorage area. I'm not sure what the anchorage area is like now. As I said, I haven't been into it since I had the big boat, but I have heard that the Little Ships Club that's at the 1 mile owns some moorings in that anchorage area, and you have to be a member or pay them to use those moorings. I imagine there must be still some room to anchor, but as I said, haven't been there, not sure. You'll need to go in and check that for yourself. The 1 mile is an extremely good anchorage, very well sheltered and very small. I've only ever been into it a couple of times. I remember once in particular was around Christmas, New Year's Eve time. Some friends on another boat said come on over to the 1 mile and anchor up there and come into the Little Ships Club for the party. Took the boat in there, had a look around, and the boats were just jam-packed in there. I mean, some of them were tied up together and anchored on the one anchor. It was that jammed in there. I didn't think I could drop my anchor and have the boat swing without hitting someone. So I just turned around and left. I called in there again with the big boat about maybe a year or so after that. It was one Easter as I recall, and it was just as crowded. I got into the 1 mile, had a bit of a look around for an anchorage, decided it was too crowded for me and went out again. Haven't been back there since then, although with the last couple of trailer boats, it's the first time I've had a 4-stroke engine, and without the 2-stroke fumes, my wife is much more keen on the boating. So going to the 1 mile for lunch one day is back on the bucket list. I just haven't made it there yet. And of course the main attraction that brings most of the boats there is the Little Ships Club. For those of you that don't know about the Little Ships Club, I'll put a link in the description. They're on Facebook and they've got a web page as well, so you can go and check them out there and find out a bit about them. I've never been there myself, although I still intend to go one day. However, I do know a lot of people that have been there and swear by it as a great place to call in for lunch or dinner, or even to sleep ashore overnight if you're a member. There's a shipwreck between the 1 mile and Myora. It's been unmarked on the charts for a long time, so I don't think anyone knows what the name of the ship is. But don't get too excited, you can't fish it, it's inside the green zone. The first thing I want to talk about at Myora is the green zone. It's a little bit different. Not only is fishing prohibited, but anchoring is also prohibited. The idea of that is to protect the reef, so you've got a double problem there. Not only do you have to watch out that you don't fish in the green zone and watch out that your bait doesn't pass into the green zone even if your boat's outside it, but if you're not fishing you also need to make sure that you don't anchor in the green zone. So if you're going into the Myora anchorage, just make sure you stay a bit north of the final red beacon on the south side of the anchorage. That should keep you clear of the green zone. There's quite a big drop off at Myora, but unlike Peel, a lot of that drop off is inside the green zone, so you can't just go and fish the drop off. You've got to find some areas that are outside the drop off. I'll give you some marks that should work for you. The turquoise area there marks the Myora anchorage. I haven't been into that anchorage since I had the big boat, but as I recall, the further north you went in the anchorage area, the shallower it got. But if you're in a trailer boat, you should be able to get up a fair way to the north in that area. That's probably a good idea because most of the larger boats anchor towards the south of the Myora anchorage. I've marked the sandbank in this slide. The anchorage is inside that sandbank, but at high tide it's not going to give you much protection if the wind's coming down from the north or anywhere from the west to southwest. You're going to be pretty exposed there. But anything from the southeast, the east and the northeast is a really good anchorage for that. I marked the location of Myora Springs there. Apparently that was one of the reasons you called into Myora, to go ashore and have a look at Myora Springs. But I must say that when I did, I was very unimpressed with it, so maybe it was more spectacular back before I ever got there. Certainly wasn't worth the effort I put into seeing it. Go and have a look at it by all means, but I was pretty unimpressed. Wasn't at all like I'd heard it described. I've marked the fishing line in yellow again. That covers the general area that you'd sound looking for fish. These days I only get to fish the Myora reef once or twice a year, but I have got some marks that I've sounded around there. It's been a while since I got those marks, so I don't exactly remember why I put the marks there. It could have been structure, or maybe I saw a concentration of fish there at the time. In any case, I took the marks so that when I go back there I can use them as a starting point to sound around and see what I can find. The next area to talk about on our way north is the Rainbow Channel. The Rainbow Channel isn't an area that I fished a great deal. I always fished it when I was there, but it wasn't an area that I went to fish. I went there for other reasons, and while I was there I did some fishing. I always managed to get a feed out of it. Everyone used to tell me, oh, Rainbow Channel, go trolling there, you'll pick up heaps of mackerel and all the other pelagics. And back in the day I gave it a go, threw a pilly on a hook and out the back and trolled along. Guess I didn't have a clue of what I was doing because I never got anything. I did give it a go every now and then while I was there. There wasn't as much boat traffic back then, so I can't blame that, but for whatever reason I never did any good. I have had more success recently since I've discovered planer boards and 3 and 4 inch spoon lures. Had a few hits on that, so looking forward to trying it again as time permits. So many things to do in the bay, so little time to do them in. Anyway, let's have a look at the detail of fishing in the Rainbow Channel, where I have had some moderate success. This next map shows the track I followed on one of the trolling expeditions. I'm not saying it's the best track to follow, but it's what I've been starting to have some success with. Also, please note that I'm not always between the beacons. I've been in the Rainbow Channel enough that I can find my way through it without following the beacons, but there are areas where you will run aground if you don't know the sandbanks. There's also a lot of areas that you can just go through quite safely. Anyway, I chose the track that I followed mainly to hit the areas where I thought were most likely to have fish, rather than to stay in the channel. If you don't know the Rainbow Channel, go through it a few times at very low tides, and get a feel for where the sandbanks are before you try going outside the marked beacons. This is the same area viewed on the Navionics map, where the white areas in the water are the deeper areas and the darker blue are the shallow areas. A little bit counterintuitive, but I find it easier to read that way. In this view I've circled the areas that I'm trying to troll through. If you do decide to do that and go outside the beaconed channel, just be aware that there are some sandbanks that will hang you up. Take it real slow first time through, make sure you've got a track that works for you, and keep an eye on the tide. Most of the fishing I did in the Rainbow Channel was back when I had the big boat, and therefore it was done out of the tinny. I'd just take the tender out and drift along with the bait floating out behind me. I mainly targeted the areas that I've got the green lines on, where there's a drop off down into some deeper water. Usually managed to get a bit of a feed. Being a while back, there was no such thing as a sounder in the tinny. What we did was took the soundings in the big boat as we went through the channel and took some landmarks so that I knew where the deep areas were, and I went back in the tinny, lined up the landmarks and drifted through what I thought was the deep areas. These areas I've marked are approximately where I remember doing the fishing. I've no idea if they're the best areas in there or not. These are just the areas where I tried to fish the deep holes. There's some other styles of fishing along the Rainbow Channel that yield even better results. I've drawn some blue lines along the sandbanks. I used to fish that as well, just on the drift. It's hard to remember so long ago just exactly what I used to catch and where I used to catch it, unless the fish itself was very memorable. I think down along the sandbanks what I used to get was mainly the bread and butter species like whiting, brim, flathead and maybe the occasional sole. I can't swear to that because it was a long time ago, but I think that's pretty much what that area used to produce. Once the tide was coming in, the sandbank started to cover up. I used to fish that area with a whiting hook and worms or squid tentacles and just cast up onto the sandbank and slow wind back. On the southern end of the banks where I've drawn the blue line, there's some oyster leases, and that's particularly good fishing. And if you see those purple lines around the channels that go in amongst the banks, I used to take the tinny down through there to fish in around the back of the oyster leases, and that used to produce some really nice fish as I recall. Just one thing about fishing around the oyster leases, be very careful not to disturb the oyster lease. These guys are out there trying to make a living. Do everything you can not to disturb the oyster lease, and then everyone can pick up some nice fish around it. I'll just mention that I don't fish around behind the oyster leases anymore because I've got a fiberglass bait. I only used to do that with the tinny. I've marked the areas in front of the passages that run off across the Amity banks. As the tide goes out, the smaller fish that are feeding up on top of the banks come down into the passages, and with the tide running out, the water in the passages is flowing out into the Rainbow Channel, and that brings the smaller fish with it. Now, since the water in the Rainbow Channel is running up towards the South Passage bar on the run-out tide, I've always had the best success positioning my boat just outside the passage on the northern edge of it, so they catch the fish as they come around the corner. And that seems to be the same thing that the big fish are looking to do. Now, fish aren't very bright, but they're not entirely stupid either. They know where to go to get a feed, and the big fish will be waiting outside those passages for the little fish to be flushed out so that they can eat them without too much effort. As the tide runs out, keep your bait down there amongst the smaller fish that are coming out of the passage, and the bigger fish is going to grab that thinking it's another feed. Well, it is another feed, only this is a feed for you. Finally, where I've marked the yellow line, there's some weed beds along that area. Now, I'm not sure exactly where they are because I haven't looked for them for a long time, but you used to be able to go down along there and shine a light in the water of a night time and get some squid to come up where you could capture them. I haven't mastered the squid jig, but I imagine if the weed beds are still there, you could go there and catch some squid on a squid jig. There's a couple of green zones to look out for in the area. One is the East Amity Banks green zone. As long as you're fishing the drop-offs in a deeper area on the northern end of the Rainbow Channel, you should be quite safe. But best to have a GPS that shows you the green zone so that you can just make sure you are outside it. And always remember that the fisheries can book you for fishing in the green zone if they say that your bait is in the green zone even though your bait isn't. The other green zone is on the Wongawallan banks just south of Amity. You really need to watch that one if you're going to be looking for the weed beds I mentioned for the squid, but otherwise if you're fishing the drop-offs you should be okay, just don't cast up into the shallows. And as I just mentioned earlier, make sure you've got a GPS that shows you where you are in relation to the green zones. Any GPS that takes an avionics map should do that. Before we look at Amity itself, let's have a look at some of the travel times and the various ramps to Amity. If you're departing from Manly Boat Harbour or the Wellington Point ramp, the best way to go is through the Rouse Channel. If you're familiar with the Rouse Channel, there's some shortcuts up on the Amity end that will save you a considerable amount of time, but if you're not familiar with it, I really recommend you stay with the marked channel. The shortcuts take you through some very shallow banks and some narrow channels. As I said, it can save you a lot of time, but you can also come to grief pretty easily, so if you're not familiar with the area, stick to the marked channel, have a good look around at low tide, and it'll give you a bit of an idea what you can and can't do. If you want to, I'd recommend experimenting with it at low tide. Take it easy, and you've always got the rising tide if you do come to grief and end up on a sandbank. You've only got a little while to wait before the tide comes up and plates you off again. The township of Amity is not a bad destination in itself. You needn't worry about going to Amity. It's not the same Amity that featured in the movie Jaws, although there are quite a few bull sharks getting around Amity. It's not a place that I'd like to swim outside the swimming enclosure, but there are a lot of people that do, and over the years a few have been bitten. There's a jetty there that you can tie up to, but I never have, and I wouldn't at low tide because coming in to look at it, I've seen a lot of barnacles on it. They'll scratch your boat like you wouldn't believe. It might be alright at high tide, but as I say, I haven't taken my boat in there. If I've gone into Amity in the past, it's been with the big boat and I've just beached a tender and gone for a walk around the township. Gone and got an ice block, that sort of thing, have a wander around. There's accommodation there, so if you wanted to stay on the island, you can stay at Amity and have your boat just nearby. There's always been tea leaves around, but there seems to be a lot more around these days, so I tend not to leave my boat unattended. If we go to the shops to buy something, someone always stays with the boat. But you may have more faith in human nature than I have, so if you're comfortable with it, you can leave your boat on the shore and have a good wander around. I haven't fished around Amity for many years either. There's a huge run in the water when the tide's at full flow. I used to fish there mainly around the turn of the tide, so there wasn't so much current, and that was mostly because I was in the tinny. As I recall, there's a drop-off around that green line, quite a deep and sharp drop-off, and that used to be pretty good fishing. Just float a bait out there while you're drifting. A little bit further north, I've marked a circle, and that circle is roughly around the area of some structure. I haven't got a GPS mark for it. I used to just visually line it up with some marks on the shore. Either I've forgotten what the marks were, or the marks have disappeared, because I couldn't find them again when I looked for them a while back. There used to be enough structure there to hold some fish, but again there's a huge run in that current, and if the tide's running out it'll suck you straight over the bar. So use appropriate caution if you're fishing there. I put a red line in because as I've been going past recently I've noticed some shark drum lines in. And the law says that you can't be within 100 metres of those drum lines. So I just put a red line in to remind you that there are some drum lines somewhere in that area. Can't miss them, big yellow buoys. Just stay away from them so you don't go getting a fine. Rainbow Channel is one of the major highways for fish in and out of the bay. So that area around Amity, you're going to get them going past as they come in and out of the South Passage Bar. It's the same with any area. The more you fish it, the better you'll get at fishing it. I won't say I was ever an expert at fishing the Rainbow Channel because I only fished it when I was there. I didn't target it as a fishing area, but I always managed to get a feed out of it. Its positioning makes it a major highway for fish in and out of the bay, so I expect you'd still do pretty well fishing there. However, there's a lot more boating traffic now than there used to be, particularly on the weekends. So I'd try fishing it during the week if possible. I would think you'd do a lot better then. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thank you for taking the time to watch it. I hope you got something out of it. Rainbow Channel is a good area to fish. A lot of boat traffic there, which does make the fishing a little bit difficult. But if you can get out midweek, you should do a lot better. Don't forget to click like, comment, and if you're enjoying this series, subscribe so that you get to know when I upload a new video. Until next time, good fishing.